In our discussions during the past few weeks about putting pure religion into practice, we've brought awareness to the fact that there are some heartbreaking realities in the world. There are 143 million children living in this world who are orphans, and 1 billion precious children live in poverty without access to clean drinking water. And 18,000 children under the age of 5 die daily due to conditions associated with poverty. We had a visitor here last week from Smelser, Arkansas, and he texted me and said that he couldn't get that last stat off of his mind. And he said, think about the impact of that one stat alone. That would be like the entire population of Florence being gone in 2 days. It would be like everyone in Lauderdale County just disappearing in 5 days. It would be like all of the entire Quad Cities area just disappearing within a week. We said each hour around the clock, 250 children lose one or both parents as a result of AIDS. And right at 8,000 newborns die within a month of their birth due to poor care and conditions. Every minute, a child dies of malaria, which is a preventable and treatable disease. And all of those things tug at our hearts. Just like the death last week of 6-year-old Matthew Gregory. It tugged at our hearts. And I will say that it should. It should. And not only should those things tug at our hearts, but they should move us to do something about it, to make a difference in the life of one. And so I commend you for doing something about it. Because of your compassion and generosity, $2,000 will be given to the North Alabama Christians Children's Home. 8 children will be sponsored monthly through Compassion International. 5 more precious orphans will be raised in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord at the Wings Children's Home that we help to support in India. But here's the million-dollar question that we're posing this morning. Are we as moved about the spiritual condition of the lost as we are about the physical, emotional, and economic plight of widows and orphans? Does the heartbreaking reality that the majority of the 7 billion people who live in this world are lost, does that reality tug at our hearts as deeply as we're moved to do something about their physical condition? Are we as moved spiritually to do something about their greatest need? That should move us into action as well. Sadly, I'm afraid that what one Brotherhood's preacher said back in the 90s might still be true. He said many of our churches are no longer soul-saving institutions. They are worshiping societies, and their main emphasis is on holding services and having social events rather than reaching the lost and introducing people to Jesus. Please do not get me wrong. Collective worship is an integral and vital part of a Christian's life and personality, and I anticipate it greatly, and so need to assemble with you to praise God and commune together and be encouraged by you and by the prayers that are lifted up. And I'm well aware of the fact of how important fellowship is. In Acts chapter 2, it's one of the big 4 priorities. I believe with all of my heart that worshiping together is vital to our lifeline of walking humbly with God, and I believe that fellowship is so important. But I also believe that what an old preacher once said is true. If a man has a soul, and he has, and if that soul can be won or lost for eternity, and it can, then the most important thing in this world is to bring that man or that woman to Jesus Christ. One insightful writer, in fact, the most insightful writer in my estimation in our brotherhood, said, if our greatest need had been information, God would have sent us an educator. And if our greatest need had been technology, God would have sent us an engineer. If our greatest need was money, He would have sent us an economist. But since our greatest need is forgiveness, our God sent us a Savior. Isn't that good? So let's open our Bibles this morning to a very powerful and convicting story that's found in 2 Kings 7, verses 3 through 9. Here's the story. We're in the days of Elisha, and there's a famine in Samaria because the Arameans had besieged the city. The food supply was cut off. It quickly ran out, and people were starving. The lepers who lived outside the city were desperate. Why? Because if there's not any food inside the city, then there certainly will not be anyone who's going to bring them food outside the city. They'll become the first casualties of the war. So these 4 lepers outside the city gates start talking to each other, and they said, if we stay here, we'll die. If we go into the camp of the enemy, we will die. But that second one is a little better option, because even though they might capture us, they might spare us and give us something to eat before we die, and at least we'll die with a full belly. So at dusk, they get up, they go into the city. And when they got there, the enemy was not there. Verse 6 says, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses, who they thought were being attacked. They thought, these enemy, the Arameans, thought that they were being attacked by the king of Israel. So they, in their panic, abandoned the camp and then abandoned the siege, and they flee for their lives. So when the lepers come in to this enemy camp, they find it abandoned, and they find all this food laying around, and they sit back and they eat and drink until they're filled to the brim. Look at verse 9. Then they said to each other, what we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. Brethren, we cannot keep the good news to ourselves. That would be the most selfish thing in the world to do. To have the solution and know the answer to people's greatest needs and not share it would be the most selfish thing in the world to do. What is the first thing we love to do when we have good news? We love to share it. We love to share it. Yet when it comes to Jesus, how many of us are more like these lepers before they came to themselves? Once they came to the reality that they had what other people needed, then they headed back to Samaria and told the people the good news that God has provided. There's food in the enemy's camp. Initially, their people were afraid to believe it. Why? Because it's good news that's too good to be true. Eventually, they're convinced that those lepers are convicted that what they are sharing is true. And so they go, and they all experience the joys provided by the Lord. That's the way we have to start thinking and acting. We're called to embrace and implement the vision that our shepherds have cast before us, which is for there not to be one pew sitter here, but each and every member is called to participate in a ministry. And I want you to listen very, very closely. Those ministries must point the way to Jesus and have intentionally an evangelistic component to them, which is what we told a massive group of people here Monday night for Upward Soccer. Because if it does not have an evangelistic component to it that links people to Jesus, we're no different than the wreck. So I want to pose a $1 million question once again. Are we as moved about the spiritual condition of the lost as we are about their poverty and about helping them. I'll tell you two people who are and who integrate both doing good and evangelism, and that's Danny and Nancy Smelser. They're Christian physicians who meet the physical needs of the poor in order to tell them about the great physician, the one who can heal their sin-sick soul and meet their greatest need. Since Danny will be going back to Tanzania later this week, since Nancy will be joining him soon, since many of you have asked me what we can do in addition to what Crosspoint is presently doing to help them, I want to give Danny the rest of our time here this morning to tell you the good news that he and Nancy cannot and will not keep to themselves. Brother Danny.
If you were to go outside in the parking lot this morning and crank up your car and start heading to the West Coast, you might encounter along the way a sign that says Continental Divide. And I always wondered what that meant when I was young. What is a Continental Divide? And turns out that it's a place that scientists have designated as the spot in the North American continent where if there's precipitation, if there's rain or snow that falls on that spot, it's going to be divided. Half or some of it will go towards the west, some will go towards the east. So it depends on which side of the Continental Divide your raindrop falls on, whether or not you will go into the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic. And we have defined this phenomena as a watershed. And so when there is a snowflake, if you go up hiking the Colorado mountains and you come to the watershed that's shown here, and you're standing on top of that mountain and you're watching it snow, and if the wind happens to blow a snowflake a little towards the west, then it goes into the western watershed, and vice versa to the east. And you could just say the small puff of wind is a watershed moment. This morning I'm going to talk about watershed moments in missions, specifically in Tanzania. And I want to define what I'm talking about with you. A watershed moment is a small event that is a defining moment that shapes a destiny. That small gust of wind sends that drop of water to a destiny far away in one direction or another. And I'm going to go over with you 4 watershed moments that have changed the ministry in Tanzania and changed the way that we live in our work there. This is a work of Crosspoint Church of Christ, this church family. So this is your work. This is not mine or Nancy's or others who have been there. We do all of this together. So I want to share these moments with you. Watershed moment number 1 was one day when we were down by the reservoir having a baptism. And I looked up to my left and I saw a herd of cattle coming in, and the little shepherd boy, the little cattle boy, was driving the cattle. And when he gets to the water's edge, all the cattle rush down to drink. And I look up, and lo and behold, there's the child doing exactly the same thing as those cattle. The children drinking with the cattle. That was a watershed moment for me. It gripped me, the poverty of the people that we were serving. In a small way, we can now appreciate what profound poverty is. Of course, I'm not impoverished physically, as far as our Earth's resources. We have many resources at our disposal, so we're not impoverished people. But when you live amongst people who have this level of poverty, you realize the poverty that is there. And you say, so what? Well, the poverty of the people leads to disease. It leads to death. It has a repercussion of being poorly educated because there's no resources to go to school. And it opens what I call the poverty cycle, a cycle that repeats itself over and over. The impoverished raise up children who will be impoverished, who raise up children who are impoverished, and the cycle gets deeper and deeper and bigger and bigger. So how do the impoverished Tanzanians live? I wanted to show you a shot of a man, typical lifestyle, living in a cow dung and mud hut with dirt floor, thatched roof, living in the shadow of an active volcano. Interestingly enough, an active volcano in Tanzania there within 40 or 50 miles of where we work, Oldonyo Langai, is seen in this picture. And you can see that they're walking. They have no automobiles, they have no power equipment to work with, and here they scratch out a living. And the average income per person per day in Tanzania is $1.45. You think about it, how your life would change if you lived on $1.45 a day. Now let's go to the USA. In the USA, the income per person, by contrast, is $143 per day, or almost 100 times more than that of Tanzania. So truly, there is profound poverty in our world. Truly, we are the rich. And truly, the Bible says, to whom much is given, much will be required. Watershed moment number 2 was one day when we were operating the clinic there at Tanzania Christian Clinic, and a patient came in. The lady said, this baby is not doing well. And we looked at the baby was malnourished and looked like didn't really have long to live. And so I began taking the history from the caregiver and found out that this woman was not really the baby's mother at all. The baby had been a twin, and the twins one of them is given out to someone else to raise because the parents don't think they can raise two at once. And it turned out this was the grandmother, and the grandmother, with all of the love that any grandmother would have for a baby, had started trying to nurse this baby to feed it. And of course there was no breast milk there. So the baby was just starving. And so I call watershed moment number 2 the case of the missing mothers. Mothers become missing in Tanzania for many reasons, due to sickness, HIV, malaria, perhaps for social reasons. They're absent from the home. James, in his book, talks about true religion, talks about caring for these sorts of individuals. And Frank has so beautifully articulated that for us the past few Sundays. And so watershed moment number 2 was the fact that the missing mother is so prevalent in this world and changes a life so drastically. When a child's mother becomes missing, it is definitely a defining moment for that child. Think about where you would be without your mother. Without help, the motherless children spiral down deeper into the cycle of poverty. Watershed, let me wait on, the third one is coming, but before we get there, let me show you a picture of one of my favorite photos. This baby baboon who's riding his mother's back. You go to the game parks and you see these baboons walking around with these babies holding very tightly to their mothers. And we had a young boy who came to our door one day and brought us a baboon he wanted to sell us that they had taken from his mother. And this was in 1993 when we first went. And so the kid said, oh, please, can we get this baboon? So I said, well, okay, we'll try. And so we had a pet baboon at our house, but the problem was the baboon was too young to be taken from his mother. And the baboon did not have good social skills. And we suffered greatly from no social skills. So when the mother is missing, the child does not develop. In the animal kingdom, and also, of course, with people, children who take care of children is something we see commonly. We see children who will bring even younger children to the clinic for care, like this little girl here. And then we see children who are left to make it the best way they can. And sometimes that's drastic measures. And I wanted to show you this very provoking and moving photo. I hope it's not offensive to anyone, but it's true. It's the way the world is. Of this child. You know, in America, we have children. We give cow's milk to our children sometimes for their nourishment. But in Tanzania, sometimes the children don't have anyone to give them that nourishment. And so they have to get it the best way they can. And here you see a child drinking from the cattle. In the beginning of this talk, I showed you child drinking with the cattle, and now we see one drinking from the cattle. So, as we go on our way down the road to Jericho, and we see this poverty crisis, and we see these struggling people, do we do like the priest and Levite and look the other way and continue on our way to Jericho? No, I don't think we can do that. Watershed moment, or defining moment number 3 that I wanted to present to you, is a young girl who is married to a senior man. She's working in the clinic one day, and this woman comes in, this older man is with her, and I thought, well, this is her father, or uncle, or somebody. Turned out it was her husband. I call this phenomena the phenomena of the child bride. And we define the child bride as someone who is married to an older person, and usually the bride is less than age 18. Statistics say that from the year 2011 to 2020, there will be 140 million child brides. And out of those 140 million, 50 million will be less than 15 years old when they get married. There's an old song that says, "Where have all the young men gone?" I'd like to change it. Where have all the young girls gone? And we know that we see the young girls of Tanzania, and there's a watershed moment in their life. Are they going to be able to continue in school, or are they going to be sold and become a child bride? And there are calculating fathers who have these daughters, and some of them are in polygamous marriages, by the way, but they'll have daughters, but they really don't have what I call true love for their daughter, because they will make a bride price with a neighbor who's an older man who wants a young woman to help him with his household affairs. And there's a young lady named Sione who became a Christian, who went to the school where we did some evangelism. Sione came to me. She just graduated from school. She came to me recently and said, "My father has given a bride price, and I'm going to have to leave." And I said, "Where are you going?" And she told me, and it was a child bride situation. So it is a crisis. Let's look at the bride price. What is it? I wanted to show you what they look like. Cows, goats, 4 or 5 cows, 3 or 4 goats, a couple of blankets. And that's what these men say their daughters are worth, and that's what they'll trade them for. So then where does the child bride go? She goes into a life of servitude. She'll be one of several wives, probably. She will serve both the husband and the older wives, co-wives, and she will harvest and carry firewood for cooking food every day. She will go for water on foot to a reservoir that's miles away. And what long-term consequences is there to the child bride phenomenon? Well, of course, there's going to be early pregnancy, early undesirable pregnancy. And these women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than a healthy older young woman would be. And the infants they have are 75% more likely to die. These child brides are going to be locked into a life of illiteracy, of poverty, of sickness, and of repeating the poverty cycle. And with no education, the best that they can hope for their children is that maybe they might be able to escape that social situation. But what can they do? They have no skills, no training. They might become street vendors selling food. The sons might go to primary school but not make it into secondary school because they have to drop out. Then what kind of work will they do? Well, one of the best jobs that you see these young men doing is being a motorcycle driver. They have these motorcycle taxis they call boda-bodas. And the young boys will rent a motorcycle and start taxiing people around town. Or they might become a dealer with general merchandise and open a shop on the street. So when you think about poverty, when you think about orphans, when you think about child brides, you can't help but think this world is a dark place. This world is fallen, as we see happened in Genesis in the beginning. So, but now let's take a moment and go to something a little more pleasant. Let's talk about watershed moment number 4, a weeping newborn. This young lady is named Naama. Naama lived across the road from the clinic, and she decided, after studying with some of our Christian sisters, she decided she was ready for baptism, to be born again. And at her, I've never had been part of a more touching baptismal service. This girl just began weeping, very, very heavy weeping just after she was baptized. She was so happy, and it just gave us joy. David in the Bible said, "Restore to me the joy of my salvation," Psalm 51. And I think there is a lot of joy in salvation. The Tanzanians take great joy in salvation because it is that pearl of great price that they find. And there are also other levels of joy that we encounter in mission work. And one is the joy for the teaching. The teachers, it's such a wonderful blessing. When I first went to Tanzania, I thought, I'm going to go and contribute to help the people. But I've learned I really am the one being helped. The people are helping me. They give me so much joy. And how can you know a subject matter until you teach it? You might think you know something, but not until you start teaching other people do you really comprehend that material. So it has helped the teachers in a very special way to go into the mission field and teach. Teaching in schools is a special joy, to see the students assemble and to be so happy to have an hour of Bible study. And this happens in the government schools as well. And we had great success here in showing a photo of that class of students we worked with for a couple of years. So then comes the day when a church can be planted. And here's a small congregation assembling for church. We met in that school building there for 2-3 years. And that's a special joy. And then being a part of a church planting, that's a special joy, to be in a small church from the very beginning. And what we try to say and what we try to do is to plant churches and not transplant churches. And there's a difference, because you can see here that the church in Tanzania that's planted there looks a little different than what you might see here. So we lay foundations, and that's a joyful thing. And we enjoy laying the foundations for the growth of the church. We were building came to the point where we were ready to start a building for the Monduli Jew Church, and we laid the foundation. And I couldn't help but think of the scripture. Paul referred to it this way. He says, "There is no foundation that will last except for Jesus." So the building is completed, and inside the Monduli Jew Church building now, you see this scene, and you can see those windows, which this congregation sent money over, because in the beginning we had no windows. We got the roof on, floor there and the roof on, but no windows, and the rain was coming in. So we say thank you to those of you who helped us with the windows. And we had a Women's Day right out. First couple of months we were open with that new building. We decided to do a Women's Day, and to me, one of the most impressive things was to see the young men outside with a kettle over a fire brewing tea for the women's. Now, the men don't cook for the women's or do things like this for women very often, and they looked up at me and said, "When are we going to have a men's day around here?" So there are the women posing for a photo after a Women's Day. And when you think of these bright moments in mission work, you say, though the world is dark and fallen, you can still see some light. And there is still some light along the way. And we can send the light, or we can take the light. And so how do we do it? What's our vision? What's the plan? What's the goal? What's the future? Well, to answer that question, I want to show you a picture of the crested cranes, the national birds of Kenya. They're some of the most beautiful animals in Tanzania. And we know that the birds have such wonderful vision. And like eagles and hawks that soar looking for prey and can see for such long distances, I think we have to have a vision like these animals. And I call it the 2020 vision, not only because 2020 is, for us humans, is perfect vision, but also because we're looking forward to the year 2020. And we want to have a vision of what the work's going to be like. So the 2020 vision for Tanzanian work is kingdom growth. That's what we want to do. We want to be a part of. We also want to have a holistic ministry where we're ministering to the physical, to the spiritual, to the emotional. And we want the ministry to be a multiplying ministry, not something that just one or two people are doing, but that one or two can do, and then 4 or 5 can do, and continue to multiply the ministry until we're work ourselves out of a job, and that's the whole idea. So, step 1 of the 2020 vision for the Tanzania work is this: Tanzania Christian Clinic. You already know about Tanzania Christian Clinic. We opened this work about 5 years ago. Cross Point has helped us from the beginning. They help with the funds to help operate the clinic. Now, the missionaries go and come on their own budget, and the missionaries are not supported by the funds that the missions committee sends us. The mission money that's sent our way is a benevolent operation and evangelistic operation for this clinic. And notice in this sign that what we're about is healing the whole man, not just the physical, but also the spiritual. And notice in this sign that the cross is bigger than the medical part. The cross overshadows the medical part at Tanzania Christian Clinic. And so we are targeting care for the underserved and the neglected in our area. And neglect can lead to a lot of physical maladies. Neglect of body hygiene leads to serious scalp infections. Neglect of foot care, lack of shoes, etc., leads to fungal infections of the feet. Neglect of a simple scratch on the eyelid leads to periorbital cellulitis, swollen face that a child can die from. Neglect of a leg wound leads to a chronic ulcer. Neglect of hypertension, neglect of diabetes leads to chronic illness. Neglect of clean drinking water leads to intestinal infections and dysentery. Neglect of sanitation. You know, it's such a nice thing to just be able to have indoor toilets and go to the bathroom and flush the toilet. You just don't think about what a blessing that is until you go and live in a place where that's not possible. And furthermore, it's not possible to have a clean toilet, but it's also not possible to keep the water clean because the runoff from the toilet gets in the water supply. And so neglect of the sanitation in these communities lead to serious illnesses. And neglect of malaria prevention. So many babies come in with malaria, and countless people die from simple mosquito bites. TCC has made a lot of progress in 5 years. We have to mention to you that we want to thank the donors from Florence who gave a x-ray machine that's now installed and operational. The first TCC x-ray was done this year. Our x-ray technician, Magessa Makiri, is demonstrating that x-ray in that photo. And then we've had numerous volunteers who come short-term, some who come long-term. We have Tanzanians who we hire to work with us. We have nurses, Tanzanian nurses, who help us distribute the medicines. But we also have women who live in the bush. What is the next step in our vision for Tanzania Christian Clinic? We want to minister to the Maasai women who are living in the bush. Because when they're pregnant and they're ready to deliver, what options do they have? Well, they can deliver at home, or they can walk to a friend's home and have a delivery by an older woman, and this will be in dirty surroundings. Or they can go to a district hospital, and here we show you a photo of the delivery room at the district hospital. Patients have to bring their own sheets, their own gauze, their own soap, their own towels, their own material to clamp the cord. They have to bring all their own articles for the delivery. And then here's the maternity ward where they will stay to recover. And here's an example of the toilet that they will have to use. So we feel like at Tanzania Christian Clinic, we would like to answer the call that the women and leaders of the area have brought to us, that we help them with a birthing center. So building is under construction. The process construction is under way with a birthing center that should open later this year, where we hope these women can now come and have a clean sanitary delivery for their children. And we will have a nurse midwife who's helping with this. We will have prenatal and postnatal and birthing care. And hopefully we will have healthy babies that grow and mature and stay healthy so that they can run to school. And when they do get to school, they go free to the government schools, grades 1 to 7. But then they have trouble going on to the secondary level because the schools are marginal. Only 30% of the schools have electricity, and only 5% have computers. There are few textbooks. Many students will drop out, and that causes them to be uneducated and causes them to be sold as child brides. Some will enter secondary school, but they really have no hope of going to college because they can't pass the entrance exam going into the college level. So they fall back into the poverty cycle. So the 2020 vision includes a Christian secondary school. This is something we sort of new to this program of work, but we take this as an example of Acts chapter 19, where Paul was in Ephesus, and he brought his disciples for a 2-year session into the school of Tyrannus there. We see the archaeological ruins of that school. And through that ministry, he multiplied himself. And it says in the end that Christ was carried to the whole region. And you have to think a little bit that in America, some of our best universities were started by missionaries years and years and years ago that are still in existence here in this country. So the vision for a Christian school, we call it Tanzania Christian Academy of Science. It will be a school to evangelize the region, a school to serve the poor, a school to raise up church leaders, to give child brides another option, the option of going to school and developing a career. It will be a school to multiply our ministry of missionaries. There will be 6 levels of classes, grades 8 through 13, and it will be considered to be a magnet school. It will draw students from international East Africa, several nations in East Africa. The school site has been purchased, and the kids are waiting to get in. Students who graduate from this school will be qualified and competent to pass their entrance exams, and they will go out into the workforce. Some will become ministers. Here are 3 young men who have entered the ministry. And then there will be young people who go into professions, science-related professions, become x-ray technicians, nurses, laboratory technicians, etc. And then later, there will be elders in the churches. You know, there have been missionaries in Tanzania since the 50s, but there are no elders in Tanzania. So that is one objective of what we're trying to do. The road will be hard. We know there will be obstacles along the way. We know that there will be mountains to move. So we need your prayers, and we need your encouragement. If there is a Christian school, it will be like a turtle on a post. We will have needs. We won't get a Christian school in Tanzania by the efforts of any one, 2, or a few individuals. There will be a lot of needs. We will need some volunteers. We will need people who are willing to come and volunteer their time to be educators in the school, people to do construction work, people to be administrators. We still need medical workers to help us in the clinic work. So there's always the financial side, but really I think it's the personnel side that's the more critical side of what we need to see the work go forward in Tanzania. Going back to the road of life, I would say this, that everybody sooner or later falls or gets knocked down on the road of life. And none of us get up by ourselves. Everybody has to have a hand up. Somebody has to help them up. And Jesus said, I'll take a fall for you. And he did. And he took it on the cross. So, when you fall along the road of life, sort of like Saul of Tarsus, when he fell on the Damascus road, and he listened to what Jesus said. Jesus said, get up, I've got some instructions for you. Go into town. There'll be some instructions for you, what you need to do to be saved. And God gives us that same message today. Jesus himself said, you must be born again. And so like the man in this picture, you can put on Christ in baptism. And Jesus is reaching out his hands to help you to rise up from the life of sin. And you see the wounds in those hands. And I think you can count on it. There'll be elders or ministers at the front of this room this morning to minister to you if you need a spiritual response to this lesson. Let's stand and sing.